Shalom, Yeshala. Want to start off as always by giving all praise to Yahweh Hashem Shai. Double honors to Apostle GMS and honors you brothers are doing the work in truth, war, sincerity. And I was preparing a topic and basically came across proxy war, and I thought, let me actually get the proper definition for myself, and for you brothers also, so in this edition I'll be answering the question, what is a proxy war? Because if you look, at the current geopolitical arena, right now you've got a lot of proxy wars happening, and those proxy wars are basically, and this time they're basically a lead up into World War III, because that's what a lot of people don't seem to realize. They don't seem to realize that, we're already in World War III. The US, via Ukraine, shot down a flipping passenger jet just to blame it, just to use it as propaganda against Russia. Because when you actually look at this at the facts of that situation, you basically had you had a BBC Russia report, I believe it was, which, where they interviewed women right after the fact, and they were saying there were two planes. Russian radar says there were two planes, and then they basically had the guy who said he was the one who was acting under orders to shoot down the plane, and they polygraphed him, and it came out that he was lying. This, that, and the other, etc., etc., etc. At the same time, you had NATO war games happening, just around the corner. So, if they're willing to go to this, go to that level, which to the elites, a few hundred people done, that's nothing, man. They sacrificed 120 million, roughly, in World War I and World War II. So, a couple hundred people, what the fuck is that? So, I'm just going to go into the topics. As a proxy war is a conflict between two nations where neither country directly engages the other. Right, which is what you're seeing right now. You're seeing America hurting the interests of Russia. You're seeing China and America hurting each other's interests. Which is, brother's been bringing out, man, that Tianjin explosion was nothing but a strike with what is referred to as the rod of God. And the beautiful thing is, you see the rod of God in G.I. Joe, the second one, where basically you've got the person who impersonates the American president, basically gets all the world to blow up their nuclear missiles, and then once all the nuclear missiles have been blown up, he basically drops the rod of God, and then you basically see what it does. So basically, the idea is that it's a basically, if you imagine a needle, but big needle, and it's dropped out from space. So it's a high velocity projectile. And in G.I. Joe, you see it completely decimate London, which is beautiful because the Russian manifesto says that the first place they're going to decimate is London. you know. So carry on. Says, while this can encompass a breadth of armed confrontations, its core definition hinges on two separate powers utilizing external strife to somehow attack the interests or territorial holding of the other. So just like how America wants to go into Syria, but they know Syria, Syria and Russia have a pact going on, and they can't just go into Syria like that, which is why you have ISIS, which is why they created ISIS. Because I'll be honest with you, man, I've been wanting to do a video on it also, and the elites don't care about no fucking Muslims, man. The Muslims ain't they ain't a problem to them, but this whole setting up ISIS thing, it helps kill two birds with one stone. It helps push on regime change against Assad, without having to actually go on a full-blown military war against Syria, and it also helps to demonize the Israelites, right? Because what it is basically the risk they take by, straight putting this out there on TV is that people are going to look and they're going to be like, no, actually, I don't disagree with anything they say, and people are going to be woken up. Whereas if they do the whole ISIS thing, people, and the way they describe these so-called Islamic terrorists, extremists, they describe them as Israelites. So when people go past camp, they're like, wait, these are this is ISIS kind of thing, and then they basically have that hatred, so it's killing two birds with one stone there. So I'm going to get a quick definition of proxy war. This is a war instigated by a major power which does not itself become involved. So this is basically a hitman, not a hitman, more of the Don, because the Don doesn't ever get his blood dirty. Not his blood dirty, his hands dirty, man. The Don Slakia basically gets his henchmen to do his dirty work for him, which is what's going on at the moment. And then I saw some, I saw this article. It's a bit of a read, but I think the history is worth going into, so I'm just going to read through it as quickly as possible. It says, though the United States and Soviet war have never went to war with each other, Soviet Union have never went to war with each other, they found alternative ways of furthering the Cold War agendas. Both superpowers, along with their partners, sought to influence the political and economic development of smaller nations. Right, particularly in second and third world countries, Africa, Asia, Middle East, and South America. They did this in a variety of ways, ranging from providing moral and financial support to friendly political groups or leaders, though through to the supply of arms, equipment, or military training. And that's the thing. It says here, ranging from providing moral and financial support. And basically, one of the ways they do this, man, is basically they'll set up agreements and say, we'll give you money, but you just basically have to do this and that for us. You have to embrace our, what do you call it? You have to embrace our ideology. Which is why whenever one of those African countries say we're not down with homosexuality, what does the IMF say? IMF goes around, or rather European Western governments, we'll cut our aid to you. Which is how they get that hold on those smaller countries. It says both the US and the USSR also participated in so-called proxy wars where other small countries fought on their behalf. A considerable amount of this maneuvering and manipulation of other countries was carried out secretly away from the public eye. Cold War intervention of this kind often contributed to a massive disruption and human suffering in other countries, right? And that's actually literally, so by this proxy war they've set up in Ukraine, they basically have people in England and America looking at, isn't that so sad what's going on in Ukraine, and then going about their daily lives. So it's not actually causing any kind of suffering or disruption here in the countries that are actually fighting, that are instigating the proxy war rather. So people are looking around, so people are dying, too bad. So I'm going to carry on. It says, Slacky, where was I? It says democratically elected leaders were overthrown. Incoming regimes used violence and repression to consolidate their power. Civil wars were often prolonged or intensified by foreign involvement. But foreign manipulation and involvement in proxy wars also alleviated US-Soviet tensions and diluted the likelihood of a full-scale nuclear war. This time around, it's just going to keep building and building and building and building until it pops, until you get a full-scale nuclear war. The war to end all wars. Right? It says, and this point here, incoming regimes used violence. Take a look at Libya, man. The NATO intervention, that was... that just basically plunged Libya into a state of absolute anarchy, man. Libya was there before, but, so-called white man, being the devil and that. It says foreign interference was a significant aspect of the Cold War from the outset. Europe in the late 40s was shaped by Soviet manipulation of domestic politics in Eastern Europe and America's Marshall Plan funds, which were supplied with political and economic conditions. Washington intervened in the Greek Civil War in support of the nationalists, while the Greek communist revolutionaries were backed by Moscow and its satellite states. Both the amounts of American aid followed by direct US military intervention. North Korea and North Vietnam, in contrast, received large amounts of Soviet and Chinese aid, and in the case of North Korea, Chinese military support. And if you notice, man, they ain't tried bombing North Korea yet. Despite North Korea talking all this, tough talk. Soviet political and financial support for Castro underpinned the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62. The superpowers were also involved in civil wars in Cambodia, Ethiopia, and El Salvador, as well as several Middle Eastern conflicts. This is the military coup in Chile. It says the two superpowers sometimes went beyond passive support and push for what is today known as regime change, and which is what you see all the time in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya. It says the CIA in Ukraine. It says the CIA in particular was directly involved in several Cold War era coups that displaced leftist regimes, replacing them with right-wing parties or military juntas. Right? Look up that word junta, right? It says a military political group that rules a country after taking power by force, right? It says the best known of these occurred in Chile in '73, where Salvador Allende had been in power for 3 years. Allende's left-wing policies had triggered alarm bells in Washington. During his short term in power, Allende had embarked on massive land reform projects, authorized the liftings of wages, and increased public spending on healthcare and education. Most concerning to Washington was Allende's nationalization of various industries, including several American-owned copper mines. On September 11th, there's 9/11 again, 1973, the CIA backed a coup d'etat in Chile that overthrew and murdered Allende, replacing him with a military dictator. It sounds like Libya again, Augusto Pinochet. Right? It says more than 40,000 Chileans were arrested and as many as 5,000 either vanished or were murdered in the first months of Pinochet's rule. The US or its allies were also involved in coups or attempted coups in a number of other countries, including Bolivia in '70, Uganda in '71, Argentina in '76, Pakistan in '77, Iran in '79, the Central African Republic in '79, and Turkey in 1980. So, this is a whole load of countries in 10 years, right? And that made me think of the description, Habakkuk 2 and 5 says, yea, also, because he transgressed by wine. He's a proud man, neither keepeth at home. This man is always going countries causing uproar for no good reason. But that's because this man's blessing is the sword. This is Genesis 27 and 39. It says, and his father answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above, and by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it came to pass. So that's the point. It says, and by thy sword shalt thou live. A sword is any killing instrument. That's what's meant by a sword. It says Africa was another staging ground for Cold War maneuvering. It says the most powerful nations on the continent was South Africa, a former British colony from 1948, was ruled by a white minority government. In 1950, South Africa passed the suppression of you can read that. So it says the Grenada invasion. Some proxy wars were fought on the doorstep of the US. The Central American country of Nicaragua was ruled by military dictatorship until a left-wing rebel group, the Sandinistas, seized power in '79. 2 years later, incoming US President Reagan condemned the Sandinistas for their ties with Cuba and the USSR. Reagan authorized the CIA to organize, train, arm a counter-revolutionary force that could seize back power in Nicaragua. And you see that happening right now, man. When they went to fight Assad, they basically armed a group of people who then became ISIS, and then now they're doing it again. In Libya, they armed a group of random people. They say, oh, we're going to go give them training. They're doing the same thing in Ukraine. Oh, we're going to go and give them training. They're doing the same thing in Iraq. Oh, we're going to go give them. So, you see what this man is about, man. It says when the US Congress refused further payments to the Contras, Reagan admin raised funds by selling arms to Iran, by now in the hands of Islamic fundamentalists. The Iran-Contra affair, as it became known, scandalized the government, though the blame was largely shouldered by Reagan's subordinates. The Contras conducted a guerrilla war against the Sandinistas government for almost a decade, committing hundreds of murders and other human rights abuses. Which goes to show you this man only cares about laws if it's not benefiting him. You saw there. In fact, we're gonna get it. It says probably the most controversial U.S. intervention of the Cold War occurred in the Caribbean nation of Grenada. Since '79, Grenada had been governed by a Marxist group, the New Deal movement, and a moderate Prime Minister, Maurice Bishop. In October 83, hardline elements in the NJM, dissatisfied with the lack of socialist progress in Grenada, arrested and executed Bishop, then declared martial law. Fearing the island would become a pawn of Moscow and Havana, and a possible refueling stop for Cuban planes carrying mercenaries to Central America, Reagan decided to act. In October 83, Reagan ordered more than 7,000 US troops into Grenada under the pretext of protecting US citizens and other civilians. He gave this order without obtaining the consent of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher or informing Thatcher of his intentions, as Grenada was a former British Dominion and a member of the Commonwealth. Says the US landings in Grenada prompted outrage around the world. In the United Nations, 100 member states condemned the invasion, calling it a flagrant violation of international law. And you hear that being said about Russia today in terms of the whole Crimea thing, saying how the Crimean people choosing to go back to join Russia is somehow a flagrant violation of international law, you know. But all that was a chess move, man, because Russia knew they had, if they lost access to the waters by what do you call it, by I think it's the Black Sea, that was a strategic moving point for them, and they couldn't risk moving that, you know. So, this has just been a brief history and a brief it was a bit of history, and a definition of what a proxy war actually is. So, just to reiterate, it says a proxy war is a war instigated by a major power which does not itself become involved. And you see that happening now, as I've said throughout this, and ultimately it's going to end in the, in the Third World War this time around. Because right now these guys are just pussyfooting, but there's going to come a time when actually they're going to stop pussyfooting and start then the nukes are going to start dropping. So that, I'm going to say shalom.